When you think of horror movies, what's the first thing you think of? Would it be Sherlock Holmes? Well, Hammer Films thought so, and in 1959 we got The Hound of Baskin-Robbins. Wait, that doesn't sound right. I'm sorry. The Hound of the Baskervilles. Well, wait, that doesn't sound right either. It's Baskervilles, as in more than one? I always thought it was just Baskerville. But it is The Hound of the Baskervilles? Okay, yeah, that's what it is. And as I had said, this is a Sherlock Holmes tale, and it's based on the 1902 novel of the same name. And this movie, being based on a Sherlock Holmes tale, does play out as more of a mystery than a horror movie, but it does have elements of both film genres. In fact, you could say it's like a template for Scooby-Doo. This would first be released on VHS in the US in 1987 by CBS Fox Home Video, and then MGM Home Video would pick up the rights and release it in 93 and in 98 as well. 1959 would also see Hammer Films release The Man Who Could Cheat Death, which, like Countess Dracula, is an anti-aging movie with mad scientist elements. Though it sounds pretty special, this was widely criticized as being tremendously boring. And it seems like it's a horror movie, but nobody told the movie that. And seemingly, no one bothered to put it on VHS. There's no international releases, and there's no US releases. So we're gonna move on, okay? 1961 would see Hammer Films release, I guess you could say a unique horror movie with Shadow of the Cat. Now, right about this time, you might be saying to yourself, ooh, this sounds neat. It's about some kind of werecat thing, right? Werecat thing, right? Like maybe the thing Michael Jackson was in the Thriller video. I know he's supposed to be a werewolf, but come on, that's a kitty cat. Maybe Shadow of the Cat is like that. Well, let me spoil your hopes and dreams, because it's not. Though it is a rather cute and whimsical story for a horror movie. It's about a cat that witnesses its owner's murder and vows to take revenge. Yeah, that's what it's about. And here's the thing. It succeeds. I mean, it's really unique, but also very outlandish, especially considering it's not a cartoon, it's not a kid's movie, it's not some zany, wacky comedy, it's a horror movie. I just don't know what to say. I don't know, man. I just can't believe anybody gave this the go-ahead. Well, apparently nobody gave the go-ahead on VHS releases because this doesn't have any either, so let's move on. In 1962, Hammer Films wanted to do something a little different, something unique, something out of left field, because let's face it, once you do a movie about a cat that avenges its owner's death, you've sort of jumped the shark. They wanted to do another horror movie that was based on classic literature, but nothing gothic like Dracula or Frankenstein, and nothing scientific like Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. They wanted to do a horror movie about a story you really couldn't consider horror at all. Now, really quickly here, let's take a closer look at that concept. It really only takes some minor tweaking to pull that off. With that theory, all you gotta do is this, a little bit of that, hoocha, 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 and bam, Cujo is now Beethoven. Of course, that's the vice versa spectrum of that theory, and Hammer Films would do this with Captain Clegg. Now, you're probably saying to yourself, well, now this isn't very obvious. What is he talking about? Well, Captain Clegg is loosely based on the Dr. Sin book series by Russell Thorndike, and this is something that nobody really saw coming because they did, in fact, turn it into a horror movie. Well, horror adventure movie. Now, what's interesting here, perhaps a little bit more interesting than it should be, is that they had to change the names of some of the key characters to avoid copyright infringement from Disney. And what does Disney have to do with all this? Well, they were already set to do a Dr. Sin film, and in 1963 we got the Scarecrow of Romney Marsh, or aka the Scarecrow, Dr. Sin, whatever you want to call it. So during Captain Clegg's production, Disney already had this in the works, and to avoid any kind of legal problem, they just changed some names. And speaking of changing names, when this was released in the US, it was changed to Night Creatures. Now, the whole thing's a decent idea and all that, but it had no VHS releases, so we're gonna move on. Speaking of something a little different, Hammer Films wanted to dabble in the world of science fiction horror once again, and in 1963, they released The Damned, which was actually completed in 61, but was hung up with the censors. Yet British Film Code does not mess around, and this was given the go-ahead, but an X rating, which seems to be their standard reaction to any movie, I guess. Now, The Damned is your archetypal movie about spooky kids before that was a thing. So, again, Hammer Films was ahead of the curve. Technically, these aren't really spooky kids. They're radioactive kids who happen to be spooky, and I'm not sure if that's any better. This would be released in the US, but not until 1965 under the name These Are the Damned. That was a severely cut down version. It was only 77 minutes. That's only a little over an hour. But anyways, this would not have a US VHS release, but it would, however, have a UK VHS release, which I don't typically talk about for the sake of time, but this is interesting because it was released under the US title. Yeah, it was released as These Are the Damned, so it didn't have a US VHS release with that title or the UK title, but it did have a UK VHS release with the US title. That doesn't make a lot of sense, so let's just move on. So again, I ask the question, when you think about horror movies, what's the first thing you think of? No, it's not Sherlock Holmes this time, but would it be Greek mythology? Well, though that might not be the number one answer, it should be on the list because Greek mythology pulsates and undulates with hideous monsters. And one of those monsters is the Gorgon. What's a Gorgon? The best representative of a Gorgon is Medusa. We all know her, right? And the Gorgon, as a species, is a very major monster in Greek mythology. And Hammer Films thought very highly of this monster, and in 1964, they released the Gorgon. Remember earlier, like 1,000 hours ago, when I was talking about how Hammer Films would use monsters that people typically didn't? You know, like abominable snowman and radioactive blobs. Well, you can add a Gorgon to that list because nobody did a movie about a Gorgon, and no one else seemingly would until 1981 with the release of Clash of the Titans, which of course is the best known example of a Gorgon on film, but a lot of people forget that Hammer Films did it first. The Gorgon is tremendously revered as being massively underrated, and this movie monster herself is an unsung hero. And in a world of Dracula's, Frankenstein's monsters, and mummies and stuff, the Gorgon should be right on that list. And if you're a VHS collector, it should be on your list as well. It was first released on US VHS by RCA Columbia Pictures Home Video in 1984. They would release it again in 1987 in identical packaging. The only difference is the cassette. As you can see, the labels are different. And in 1988, Good Times Home Video would have their own VHS release of it. And look at this cover art. I mean, it's not bad, but once again, I'm reminded of a traveling carnival. And this would definitely be the artwork on one of those octopus rides. So, at this juncture in the episode, you've more than likely gotten a grip on what Hammer Horror is all about. It's an extensive cinemascape that ranges from classic monster archetypes like Dracula or the Mummy, Phantom of the Operas, Wolfmen, Frankenstein's monsters, and vampire lesbians, to non-typical monsters like abominable snowmen and Gorgons, to unlikely horror concepts like Sherlock Holmes or Dr. Sin, and onward to surprisingly spooky stuff like radioactive kids or vengeful house cats. Yeah, I'm still trying to get my head around that one. But historical figures would also come into play, and in 1966, Rasputin, the Mad Monk, was unleashed onto the world. And as the title implies, it's about Rasputin, or Rasputin if you're nasty. And Christopher Lee, who has so far portrayed Hammer versions of Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and the Mummy, would up his acting ante and portray rootin' tootin' Rasputin, though the poster makes him look like a cross between Dave Grohl and Bruiser Brody. Okay, so like, you know how movies used to do these gimmicks where if you went to go see it, you got something special to watch the movie with, like, I don't know, 3D glasses? Well, this one gave you a beard. Yes, this was real life. You got a fake beard when you went to go see Rasputin. Oh man, this is taking gimmicks to a whole new level, and I really like it, and I really wish a lot more movies did this. Well, anyways, this would go on to have a US VHS release, though you would have had to supply your own fake beard. Oh man, what a ripoff! This was released in 1997 by Anchor Bay as part of their Hammer collection. You know, all this gothic horror stuff and vengeful kitty cats and vampire lesbians, it's all fine and good, but sometimes, just sometimes, you want to watch a movie that's about a mutant lizard woman. Well, Hammer Films felt the same way. In 1966, we got The Reptile. And this is indeed that, because it's a lizard woman. And this is also another underrated movie monster. I mean, just look at that. Now that's a movie monster. This movie was well received and widely regarded as a superb piece of 60s horror. It has also been described as stylish and moody and surprisingly tasteful for a movie that's about a mutant lizard woman. Well, despite all the praise and accolades, this would only get one US VHS distribution in 1997 by Anchor Bay.
Watch the full episode here, as well as other classic Captain Adams VHS pirate ship adventures. And please hit subscribe.